Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? It's your boy Isaac,
And this is your boy Bryce.
and we are brothers on tennis. And folks, we have a guest today, and we are so very excited to talk to him. He is someone that has been sponsoring and paying the bills for the French Open and for Wimbledon coming up. And we are just very, very excited to introduce him to you and to just allow him to expound upon his business as well as the sport of tennis. And Bryce, I know you and I have been very, very excited to talk to this gentleman. So I'll pass it to you to do a slight introduction, if you would.
Absolutely. We are joined this morning by Paul S. Haberman from the law offices of Paul S. Haberman in Teaneck, New Jersey. The reason why Paul is just an ideal fit for us and an ideal guest this morning is because he specializes in sports law and has an actual personal investment and interest in the game of professional tennis. So we're excited to have him on to introduce you to him. You've been hearing us mention his name here over the last several weeks, but Paul is someone that we're looking to kind of bring in our camp so that when you have questions about legal things that happen in tennis, you know how sometimes we just kind of scratch our head and we're like, why did that happen? We'll
Right.
be able to bring Paul on to give his opinion from a legal perspective, and hopefully we all understand a little bit more. So without further ado, I want to bring Paul up and introduce him to the BOT family. He is now a member of the BOT family. Paul, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me. How's everybody doing?
Good.
No complaints, Paul. Doing well. How are you, sir?
I cannot complain either. It's Saturday and I'm in good company.
Ah, as are we, as are we. And so, Paul, we want to just jump right on in, man. We're introducing you to the BOT family. Would love to hear a little bit more about you, about your law profession, how you got into law, and how you got into tennis. So, talk to us about just all of that and give us a little background, if you would.
Okay, I guess I'll go chronologically. Tennis was something I grew up with in the household all the time, mainly as mainly as a fan. Although my dad still plays tennis several days a week at age 78. But when I was younger, what I noticed was on the television a lot. So I grew up watching Yvonne Lendl and Jimmy Connors, McEnroe, Yannick Noah, onwards to Sampras and Agassi, and on top of simply being aware that they were on the screen, whether or not I was focused, we also used to have, as everybody did, they grew up in the 80s, a collection of videotapes of things that everybody recorded, just a television show or something. And many times, my brother's especially scarred by this because he lost his copy of Yellow Submarine that he had on tape as a child. Many times, despite what something was labeled, it would actually wind up being tennis when we put it on, and it led us to remember the names on the one hand and certain heartbreak on the other. So,
So, Paul, let me stop you right there. You
yep.
you rattled off some iconic names from the 80s and 90s, but tell us, who was your favorite? Who were you always in support of?
Well, it's interesting. I think the most memorable for me, probably because he became something of a fashion icon during the, my would-be, wonder years or a little before that, was I always remember Andre Agassi probably best. But I think the one that I certainly identify with, or even was maybe a bigger fan of, partially for an interesting personal reason I'll get to in a second, was Pete Sampras. He just, I learned a very important life lesson listening to him speak about his way of conducting business. The concept of him getting in the zone was very important to him. That always registered with me, and it's always something I kind of have even taken into practice today. The concept of the zone. And I know it's not just him. There's other athletes that talk about that, but that was really a big part of explaining how he was able to achieve what he was able to achieve. And as an interesting side note, my uncle, even though I never particularly agreed with him, actually thought that I looked like Pete Sampras at some point. I've gotten several celebrity comparisons, and that's one of the more interesting ones. And I'll take it, I guess, but I'm not sure if I agree with it. So,
Well, next time we have you on the show, we'll do video and we'll let
That's right.
we'll let the audience chime in.
There you go.
Okay, that's fair. So I could give you all three celebrities I've been linked to, and they can decide which one I actually look most like, and hopefully Sampras will win for the purpose of the show.
Excellent, excellent. So did you play tennis at all, Paul?
Honestly, it's almost an ironic profession for me now because I really wasn't that athletic growing up. I was always in decent shape, but I never, outside of high school, gym, I never really particularly got into tennis. Again, strange. Yeah, I was always a fan of tennis. And as we've discussed, boxing and basketball, those are my big three. Of those, I think I played basketball the most. But certainly grew up most directly in tune with tennis, even if I didn't play it because of what I was talking about earlier.
Absolutely. No, I got into it late as well. Bryce is of the two of us, he's definitely the one that got introduced to tennis early on in the family. So
okay.
Yeah, but then Isaac came on like gangbusters, and Isaac has a very interesting story with and I know, Paul, you're probably not aware of this yet, but Isaac, how much weight did you lose, Isaac?
Oh gosh, around 150 pounds. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
A lot of it was attributed to tennis. So great sport, and so happy I was introduced to it.
Very nice.
Yes. And so, Paul, talk to us, getting kind of wrapping back around on the law front. So
Okay.
What got you interested in law? I mean, what led you to that career choice?
I think there was something about my personality and disposition that always lent itself to being an attorney one day. I always had sort of a mouth on me, sort of a sharp tongue, an interesting way of phrasing things. And I guess it got to a certain point where it crystallized into how do I get paid for these innate talents that I seem to have, whether or not they've always been positive or negative.
I love that reasoning. I love that.
So, yeah, I mean, I can't pretend that I was a lifelong constitutional scholar or anything like that. It was always just like, this fits me very well. So.
Excellent. And just in general, because again, just trying to gather that background for our family here. Talk to us about just that process of going through the educational process, because we all know that becoming a lawyer is one of the more demanding professions, if you will. So how was that entire process as far as going and getting your having your law degree and background?
So 3-year process is standard unless you go for something else like a business degree or an LLM with it, then it becomes more years. But I think the important takeaway, I mean, if there's any aspiring law students among the listeners or what have you, you have to know why you're there at all times, because it is challenging. It is not always readily understood, especially in law school, why certain things are the way they are. And I think if you're just trying to go through it and not sure why you're doing it, I don't know if I personally would have been able to. And certainly there are several people in my class that didn't make it all the way through, for better or worse, I guess, ultimately in their lives. But they even told us the first day, look to one side, look to the other, one of you is not going to be here. And they weren't wrong. So,
wow. My goodness. That's
like
tough.
I said, I was just hardwired for it. So,
well, congratulations
lucky for
on
us.
your success. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Paul, let's start jumping into some of these tennis questions we have. And I want to start with this one because this is one that really I scratched my head over last year. So, as you remember, last year when the whole war between, Russia and Ukraine started, there were certain kind of things that happened in the sport to try to alleviate tensions that would be on the tour. And a common, thing that they would do is they would require the players of maybe the aggressor country, right, that they couldn't play under their flag. They had to play under a neutral flag. And I know they utilized that concept in the Olympics, as well as on the ATP and WTA tours. But here comes Wimbledon doing too much, excuse me, where they decide to take it to another level. They decide to actually ban, the Belarusian and the Russian players from being able to compete. And I just remember reading Billie Jean King stating that, this was a form of discrimination. When the professional tours were started, they were started so that the players could play free of these type of political type of situations. And that by banning these players, that it was a form of discrimination based upon nationality, where they came from, not necessarily because of their involvement in the war. Now, we do know the ATP and the WTA ended up deciding to strip the tournament last year of awarding any kind of ranking points, and that definitely hurt the tournament. It hurt the players as well.
Right.
But Paul, talk to us about how Wimbledon was even in a position to make that call, and was that a call that should have been able to be made?
Well, I'll give you a little historical aside about myself first that will not color my answer, but interesting just the same in this conversation. For the longest time, I was told my ancestry was one half Russian, one half Polish. But then I started reading some family histories, and most of the Polish cities referred to in my family's history are actually in modern day Ukraine. So technically, I'm about 50% what is modern day Ukraine as far as country of origin.
Wow.
But having said that, my takeaway from what happened with Wimbledon was not so much that it, as the All England Club, unilaterally made a decision, but it received pressure from the government there to make that decision. I think if you're looking at it just as why did this one particular facility or major decide to make it, that would be a little more head scratching because in concept it's a private institution, but they had significant pressure from the UK powers that be to actually do that. And and what's interesting about that is that even though they were compelled to do that, on the one hand, at the same time, they're also, the All England Club is also, or the Lawn Tennis Association, relatedly, was also the ones that ate the fines from, the ATP and the WTA that ensued from instilling that ban, $1 million and $750,000 respectively. So it was almost, in the abstract, if they had done it as a private club, as a sort of a political statement, it's almost, to me, and I describe a lot of situations like this where people do things under pressure. It's almost like do it then, now, apologize later. But really, it wasn't them unilaterally doing it. They gave their rationale at the time, or it gave its rationale, I should say, speaking about it as an entity. But it was really with outside pressure, which you didn't necessarily get as much at the other tournaments, even if, as you note, players weren't allowed to participate under, say, a Russian or Belarusian flag. They were allowed to participate in the other ones.
Right. And Paul, considering that the ATP and WTA kind of had, I guess, fines or what have you for Wimbledon, and we didn't hear about this happening, but could the players have actually filed a suit against Wimbledon? Could the Belarusian and Russian players file suit against Wimbledon citing discrimination? Would that have been a possibility?
That's conceptually interesting. Because again, the mandate came down from the UK. So whether they could, potentially they could in normal circumstances. I couldn't immediately tell you the venue if they had to file it, but I think it was more that it was a governmental action is why you probably didn't see things like that happen as a result afterwards.
Gotcha. No,
And I'm
that makes.
assuming, yeah, and I'm assuming that the reaction from the tours kind of satisfied any kind of player concern, right? Because otherwise they could have filed something against the tours if the tours supported the ban.
Yeah, that's what it felt. I think my takeaway from all the press and everything regarding the ban is that the players were fundamentally supported. I mean, some of them came out and made statements, pledging their neutrality or what have you. But I think the general disappointment or uproar from certain segments of the tennis viewing population and the tennis community probably gave them some sense of satisfaction as well. I mean, I think to one of your earlier points, obviously the ratings points wound up being harsh for everybody, and that may be why you're not seeing it, according to recent news reports, necessarily this year at Wimbledon. But I think the overall feedback to one of your points earlier, it's supposed to be free from politics, sports. So, and I think that Russian or Belarusian tennis players that actually sensed that from that sort of reaction from their community were probably okay with that, and realizing at the same time that they're dealing with a conflict of the type that hasn't been seen in a long time in that part of the world, and understanding that there's going to be some knee-jerk and unfortunate reactions to it outside of the immediate area where it's taking place.
Very good. Right. So Paul, we're going to stick with Wimbledon. At least we're going to turn to a Wimbledon champion, and that is Simona Halep. We all know about Simona because of her, her success against Serena Williams at Wimbledon. Unfortunately, Simona has also been dealing with some trials of late based on some failed drug testing, and so maybe the question to you is kind of what talk to us about that, as far as if a player gets cited for a failed drug test and are subsequently suspended. What are the legal ramifications around that?
Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but let me unpack it. So she was suspended. First of all, she's had the worst year ever in general, between the other reports as far as her marriage and everything else. And
exactly.
Need for surgery and season-ending surgery, then followed by drug testing. The field for her on several levels this year, I guess, pending the outcome of the drug inquiry. The drug inquiry itself, I guess the first question we want to answer is who is conducting this drug inquiry, and there's an entire group known as the International Tennis Integrity Agency that's essentially tasked with rooting out corruption on the one hand in tennis and rooting out doping violations on the other. So anytime you usually hear about the integrity unit or the integrity agency, and it does make the news a couple of times a year, it's usually because somebody's been accused of either match fixing or a doping violation. And with Halep, in both instances, it's a doping violation. And essentially, long story short, the one she was actually caught with was a substance called roxadustat, which I can't say I've ever heard of previously, but is essentially involved with regulation of oxygen levels, and could be used to impact metabolism and energy levels accordingly, among its other effects. And that's what she was found to have tested positive for, supposedly, after the U.S. Open last year. Then they've taken this whole tack of irregularities in her quote-unquote athlete biological passport, which is more of a study of levels, as I understand it, of certain substances throughout a course of time that might suggest some some sort of other more gradual violation. And so the reason that she'd then be provisionally suspended, which is would be the next point to point out here, is she hasn't had a hearing on either of these yet. It's not apparent to me why that hasn't happened, but she hasn't. So then you might be asking yourself, well, okay, then how come she's not allowed to play again, provided that she's able, when the suspension's only provisional or interim or however you'd want to phrase it? And the reason is that under the integrity agency's rules, to the extent that they believe a violation might be something that would impact the integrity of the game in any way, they're not going to let the player participate until it's resolved. So whether that's a drug violation here, which again might affect her energy levels, her ability to metabolize oxygen, keep her energy levels up, or keep her more level than other players on the one hand, or if somebody who's been suspected on the other hand of, say, something like match fixing, they're not going to let those people play if they suspect it's either a habitual thing or something that could impact the outcome of anything they're participating in, or show badly in the integrity of the game, most importantly.
Right.
So Paul, I have a question on that one. So I kind of get why they would approach it from that standpoint. So let's say Simona Halep she has her trial and she's cleared of this accusation, because she's missed tournaments and has, I'm assuming, lost points during this period.
Right.
Does she get to retain those points that she wasn't able to defend while she was provisionally suspended, or does she just take an L on that?
My understanding is there's a certain period of time she could retain them, and but it sounds like by the time they get outside of it, she might be starting from square one again, such that I would say if she is cleared, best case scenario for her to get a favorable draw or really get back in the mix would be, the wild card, which is, at the discretion of all the tournaments in certain amounts. Because you figure if she lost ratings points at this point, for the amount of time she's been out, she'd probably be out of the top 100, maybe even the top 200. That's been the better part of a year almost. I guess she was suspended in October of last year, so after the U.S. Open, after the drug testing came back. So, but it feels like, just with an awareness of the regulations, that the best remedy would probably be to wild card her. You wouldn't expect somebody like her to go through qualifiers. Unless, we wouldn't expect somebody like her to necessarily rebuild on the Challenger or Futures Tour unless she wanted to. But you could expect her to get a wild card and, not necessarily a favorable draw, but at least have an opportunity to more quickly than not regain what she had if she's actually cleared of the two violations that she's accused of right now.
Right. And Paul, what about the money? What about the coins? Because think about it. Simona Halep was a top player. And not that she's, struggling for any funding or cash or anything like that. But given the fact that she wasn't able to play or hasn't been able to play, that also is a lot of income that is no longer coming in. So if she's cleared, does she have any position to then file suit to say, hey, if I were able to play and I was a top 5 player, I would have likely had these results, thus resulting in this amount of money, which therefore you all should compensate me for? Is there something or position around that?
Well, that's almost a two-part question. I mean, starting backwards, what she could have played for, that would almost be regarded in some respects as speculative damages. You'd probably go on the lower end of those. The second, whether she'd be able to, that's an interesting question as well. And certainly none of these tournaments are probably cloaked in immunity, but at the same time, as long as they were able to articulate a good faith basis for why it is that they believed that she was guilty of these violations, I would assume they'd probably clear themselves, unless some really awful findings were made, as far as them rigging her tests or fixing them or knowingly confusing them with another one or something of that nature. So I can't figure how she'd actually recover, but certainly I would imagine that each would be able to be hailed into an appropriate court if if we were found to have no basis in reality and maybe even be bad faith in filing in the first instance. I should note the most direct line, I mean, aside from monetary damages, the most direct line to even challenge any findings is the Court of Arbitration for Sport. That's where you have almost every sport's international anti-doping violations litigated ultimately, or at least you have the option if you're an athlete that's eligible to be before it. And actually, interesting side notes about the Court of Arbitration for Sport, not to go off topic, but I noticed the other day that Richard Gasquet,
yes,
his 600th ATP Tour win, and when I lecture on about certain basics of the Court of Arbitration for Sport, one story I always like to tell is about when Richard Gasquet was accused of a cocaine violation a number of years ago. And I don't know if you guys remember this at all, but
I do.
Oh yeah.
He took that all the way up to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and was able to demonstrate through experts or what have you that the positive test was actually traceable to somebody he was having some sort of intimacy session, we'll say, with. And and I read that whole decision at some point. I just found that incredible. I mean, that you probably hear that at first in the press and be like, he's full of horse dew, but establish it, So,
and that's exactly the way I felt when I first heard that. I was like, oh, come on, Richard.
Exactly. Right, Bryce? Exactly. I was like, come on, man.
I love that one. I mean, all sorts of interesting decisions come out of there. I mean, you have, Oscar Pistorius being allowed to use his blades coming out of there. You have recent decisions about Pastor Semenya and people like that coming out of there. And then you have Richard Gasquet with this particular concern, which is just humorous to me, although probably not humorous to him, but he still had a pretty long career and productive one, as we can
see. Yeah, he even had a good week this week.
Yes,
he did for a second there.
So let's stay. We were talking about Simona, so let's stay with the women. Okay. Now, we have seen progress over time on the tours, and different things like equal prize money, which Venus and Billie Jean King and the like were all behind. But we know that Serena was very involved in some of the more recent policy changes they made for maternity leave for women players. When they come back, being able to have that protected ranking for a longer period of time. Now, I don't know if it exists or not, but I know in the corporate world, kind of like where Isaac and I come from, a number of years ago, they started providing equal time for paternity time off for men. Has that happened in tennis on the men's side as well? Or right now, is that just something that the women have?
Well, it's interesting. I think the short answer is no, at least nothing I've been aware of or seen. But the women's rule change was actually where they talked about protecting the ranking for a certain period of time while somebody's on maternity leave. Is actually through the WTA specifically. It's not, so that's why the women have gotten that. But on the men's side, that hasn't necessarily come up. Not to say, for example, that it's an issue that shouldn't be raised, perhaps through the Professional Tennis Players Association. But that group that's run by Djokovic and the fellow from Canada, whose name's eluding me right now.
Pospisil.
There we go. Yep. Certainly, if it's an issue that becomes big enough for a particular male player one day to raise it. I mean, it's not like they don't have children. Djokovic's kids are all there when he won Roland Garros the other week. We know Roger Federer's wife, who was also a tennis player, essentially stepped away to raise children after a while. But we don't hear how it impacts them, whether they really want to pick up and leave or whether they bring the camp with them, including the children, which happens at least sometimes, it seems. But what if one of them actually wanted the option to be off the tour for a time without it impacting their ranking? I don't feel like anybody's raised that hard enough that I've seen to really bring that to a boiling point, but certainly an interesting issue, just the same. You could say nobody's making them compete, except that they are, because otherwise their ranking will take a tumble as of right now, because the men are necessarily not in the WTA.
Right. Well, we're at least very happy that they have improved the positioning around the maternity leave. I think that paternity leave is definitely something that will progress. I think as it has overall, but I'm so very happy that they have improved the maternity leave positioning around that. That's so important. And Paul, we're going to round this out with one last question for you, and this, of course, is related to the recent Roland Garros championships that we had here. Big news that came out of there was an unfortunate incident where one of the players in doubles hit a ball towards a ball person, a young ball girl, and she wasn't prepared for it, and it startled her. She got hit with the ball, and unfortunately, initially the team got a warning, but after some interesting debate with the umpire and their opponents, the decision was to default that duo, and all the prize money was taken away. So talk to us about that particular situation, and what are the guidelines as it relates to defaulting a player? Because we've seen that with Djokovic in the U.S. Open. We've seen that on different occasions. So kind of talk to our listeners and family here about what are some of the guidelines around the default process.
Okay, so the interesting thing with defaults is that they're not a mandatory thing. The way it's phrased, let me just read the opening sentence from the code here. It's, the referee, in consultation with the Grand Slam supervisor, may declare a default for either a single violation of this code or pursuant to the point penalty schedule set out above. And one of the violations, and the one that's pertinent to this tournament, Roland Garros, was abuse of balls, which reads, players shall not violently, dangerously, or with anger hit, kick, or throw a tennis ball within precincts of this tournament site, except in reasonable pursuit of a point during a match, including warm-up. It's an interesting definition when you think about it, because it also goes on to note, and you might recall from the tournament, doesn't that definition seem to require some intent? But it also says, for the purposes of the rule, abuse of balls is defined as intentionally hitting a ball out of the enclosure of the court, hitting a ball dangerously or recklessly than the court, or hitting a ball with negligent disregard of the consequences. And you have to figure either recklessly or negligent disregard is what they hung their hat on at Roland Garros, because it didn't seem like anyone actually thought that there was any intent or even anything at all behind it, except maybe the other team that to your point was kind of lobbying maybe more than they're supposed to, since there's nothing in the rules that say that there should be any input from the other team or the other players. So, and let me tell you one other unfortunate side effect to defaults. And I don't believe this played out the same here. But if somebody is defaulted from the tournament, there could be all sorts of other side effects, such as losing ranking points. But fortunately for the doubles players here, to the extent that they played singles as well, it wouldn't necessarily follow the doubles partner if only one party was guilty of what led to the default, or liable for what happened to that led to the default. So, but that's a small takeaway depending who you're playing with. You wouldn't, for example, want, let's take a hypothetical, Coco Gauff and Jessica Pegula are playing in Roland Garros, and I think they did. If Jessica Pegula has a tantrum and hits a tennis ball out into the stands and knocks some fan unconscious, you wouldn't want that counting necessarily against Coco as well, who of course is always a late rounds favored, as Jessica Pegula is. I'm just picking one versus the other.
Right.
This hypothetically, you wouldn't want to counting against both players. That wouldn't really be helpful, and it'd probably have a chilling effect on more highly ranked players even participating in doubles if you did that.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And wasn't it that the lady that hit the ball, didn't she lose her money and points from all events that she was in?
I was from all events in the tournament would be within the tournament rules, correct?
Right. Okay.
So,
okay. Because I know that she ended up playing mixed doubles with, and I forget her partner's name, but I believe they won the mixed doubles title there, though.
That's interesting.
Wasn't that the partner though?
Oh, I thought it was actually the young lady that hit the ball, because they were talking about redemption. They kept talking about the whole redemption piece at the final. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it was actually the partner versus.
Yeah, I thought I had read that
the
the partner was going to be allowed to continue, and I think she was in mixed doubles.
That sounds more appropriate. Yeah. I can't say whether I know the answer right there, but that sounds more appropriate. That one would have been ejected, one would have been allowed to continue. That's consistent with what's in the rules about liability. So.
Wow. So,
yeah.
Well, you know what? This has been great because we've never really had this on the show before. You know, Isaac and I always come up with our theories on why things happen, but it's great to have somebody who's actually gone through the rule books and can tell you, no, this is actually what the rule states, or this is legally what can or cannot happen. Paul, would you mind just taking a moment? I mean, we have promoted your law office a couple of times so far. You know, share with our listeners, you know, what your law office does and how they may utilize your services.
Certainly. You know, in addition to sports law, which is the reason for the season here, I also engage heavily in business litigation. Which is basically, you know, business owners or individual businesses suing each other, as well as health law, which deals heavily with medical professionals. But again, of interest for the listeners would probably be sports law, and to that extent, I've handled a lot of transactional work in sports law. You know, contracts between agents or managers and their athletes, or promoters and their athletes, depending what sport we're talking about. Sponsorship and endorsement deals for athletes, NIL deals for amateur athletes is certainly a big thing in my sphere right now. And hearings and as necessary litigation involving athletes or their handlers as well. Currently involved in a lawsuit involving a boxing promoter at that point, and one of his fighters. And have been involved in several other situations like that necessarily haven't had to be filed. But, you know, I'm there, long story short, for, you know, the entering into the agreement and the breakup of the agreement as need be, and so are the other attorneys that I work with on these matters.
Okay.
Excellent.
So,
excellent.
Isaac, before we wrap up, any final questions that you have for Paul today?
Oh, no, just very, very happy to get Paul on, have this discussion, and just really appreciate you, Paul, for all the support that you have been giving us, and we just really, really appreciate having you in the family. I'm gonna throw out a plug real quick, family. You've heard it in the advertisement, but once again, Paul S. Haberman. Give the man a call if you need any legal consultation. And again, number is 201-564-0590. So give Paul a call, y'all. He is legit. He's a good brother, and we love having him as a part of the family.
Thank you both. And I should just note, happy to come back and do it. And certainly with players such as Nick Kyrgios coming back on the tour, as long as he stays healthy, there should be some more to discuss.
Yes. There will be. And like we said, next time we'll have you on video so that we can do these celebrity comparisons.
Yes, yes.
just as a warm up, the choices are Pete Sampras, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Vinny from Jersey Shore. Those are the three I've gotten over the course of time.
Okay,
Nice.
They are all in the same range. Well, thanks again, Paul, for coming on, and
Thank you guys.
we look forward to having you on again. To our listeners, this is what we do. We bring you different stories from the sport of tennis, and this was a new one for us, and we're glad to bring it to you. So, on behalf of the podcast, this has been your boy Bryce.
And this is your boy Isaac.
And we are Brothers on Tennis. Everyone, stay well.